Why is chapter 9 of the Quran the only chapter that has no Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the beginning? This is a phenomenon that has puzzled scholars over the past 1400 years. Now, just last century, the biochemist Dr. Rashad Khalifa proposed a very controversial explanation. He claimed that God wanted to proclaim that the idol worshippers would have tried to corrupt the Quran by adding two false verses to the chapter. Which verses? Verses 128 and 129. It's very peculiar to notice, to read, that even according to the traditional Islamic sources, Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, seemed to have complained one day, or actually cried, about the fact that something had been added to the Quran. Now, simply looking at the Quranic text, and according to the traditional manuscripts, these two verses have been labeled as Meccan, but the whole surah is traditionally labeled as Medinan. And according to the traditional Islamic sources, we read that every verse in the Quran was verified by a multiplicity of witnesses, except verses 128 and 129. And when people questioned this strange exception, what was said was that Khuzaymah, who was the only one with whom these two verses had been found, it was said that his testimony equaled the one of two people. So an exception was created to justify these two verses. Now here comes a stronger proof. Just last century, the divine system, mechanism of preservation of the Quran was discovered by Dr. Rashad Khalifa. This system apparently authenticates every single element of the Quran. So it gives tangible, verifiable, observable proof about the divine preservation of the Quran. This is a mathematical system, very precise, based on the number 19. And the reference can be found in chapter 74, verse 30, which says, "Over it is 19. If, for example, we take the cumulative occurrence of the word God, Allah, in the Quran with these two verses, we have a total of 2,699. Guess what? If you remove these two verses, the total comes down to 2,698, which is a perfect multiple of 19. 19 times 142. Also, the total number of verses where the word God occurs is a multiple of 19. But it wouldn't be if we would consider these two verses. Moreover, the total number of occurrences of the word Rasul, messenger, in the Quran is 116. Now, one of the occurrences doesn't refer to a messenger of God, so we are down to 115. And guess what? If we remove these two verses, we're down to 114, which is a multiple of 19. 19 times 6. The word kul, say, occurs 332 times. The same as the word kalu, which is they say, occurs 332 times. Now, if we consider these two false verses, the pattern is disrupted by one. We would get a total of 333 for the word kul. Another very important phenomenon is related to the word Rahim, which is exclusively used as a name for God in the Quran. And including these two verses, it occurs 115. Now, if you remove them, it goes down to 114, which is 19 times 6. The issue is that in these verses, the word Rahim is used for the Prophet. But the Quran tells us that he did not have any power of mercy. The total number of verses in the Quran is 6,346, which is 334 times 19. Of course, if we add those two verses, the pattern would be disrupted. I am sure you have heard about the rhythmical excellence of the Quran. Guess what? When you include these two verses, the rhythm is disrupted. So this is pretty interesting, right? I would say actually phenomenal. Now there are some people who would be like, oh, but Rashad Khalifa removed two verses. The examples that I've given you are just a few on the mathematical level that prove these two verses as being false. There's more to it. So what I would say is that Rashad Khalifa removed two verses from the Quran, but he did so based on the divine mechanism of preservation of the Quran, of course, given by God, and therefore the removal was also and is also approved by God. Why did God allow this for 1400 years? Well, the answer is simple. God runs everything. This was God's design. And the revelation of the miracle of Code 19 was part of God's design. Guess how many years passed from the revelation of the Quran to the revelation of the miracle? 1,406 years, which is 19 times 74. 1974 was the year in which this miracle was revealed. And 74 is the chapter in which the number 19 is mentioned.